The morning mist clung to the empty streets of Millstone like a shroud swirling around the weathered storefronts and cracked sidewalks that had seen better decades. Officer Daniel Hayes adjusted his radio as he walked his familiar patrol route. The steady rhythm of his boots on pavement, the only sound breaking the early dawn silence. Beside him, Rex, a magnificent German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes, trotted with practiced ease, his nose occasionally lifting to catch the subtle scents that painted an invisible map of their small town. Daniel had been partnering with Rex for 3 years, now long enough to read every twitch of the dog's ears, every shift in his gait. They were more than just a K9 unit. They were family Rex had pulled. Daniel from a dark place after his divorce, giving him purpose, when the job felt like nothing more than writing traffic tickets and breaking up the occasional bar fight in a town where nothing ever really happened, but this morning felt different as. They approached the old bus stop on Maple Street, a rusted bench beneath a faded sign that hadn't seen regular service in over a decade. Rex suddenly stopped. Not the casual pause of a dog investigating an interesting smell, but a complete, rigid halt. That made Daniel's pulse quicken. The German shepherd's body went taut as a bowstring. His ears pricked forward with laser focus. Every muscle in his powerful frame screaming, "Alert!" "What is it, boy?" Daniel whispered, instinctively dropping his voice, as his eyes followed Rex's unwavering stare. There, half hidden behind the bench's rusted legs, sat an old leather suitcase, brown and battered with brass corners that had long since lost their shine. It looked like something from another Erath kind, of luggage people might have carried in the 1970s or 80s. Dust had settled into every crease and corner, and morning dew beaded on its worn surface like tears. Rex's breathing had changed, becoming shallow and controlled, his tail usually inconstant. Motion hung motionless. Daniel had seen his partner react to drugs, weapons, even explosives during their training, but never like this. This was different, deeper, more personal somehow. The dog's amber eyes held something Daniel had never seen before. What looked almost like recognition Rex heel. Daniel commanded softly, but the dog didn't budge. Instead, Rex took a single, careful step forward, his nose twitching as he processed layers of scent invisible to human senses. A low whimper escaped his. Throat not fear, but something more complex. Anticipation mixed with sorrow. Daniel felt the hair on his arms rise as he studied the seemingly innocent suitcase. There was nothing obviously threatening about it. No wires, no suspicious bulges, no immediate signs of danger. Just an old piece of luggage that someone had abandoned, probably dumped by a traveler who couldn't be bothered to dispose of it properly. In any other circumstances, he would have called it in as litter and had it removed by the maintenance crew. But Rex's reaction told a different story entirely. The German shepherd had saved Daniel's life twice in their partnership, once by detecting a concealed weapon during a routine traffic stop, and another time by alerting to a gas leak. In an elderly woman's home that could have killed her in her sleep, Rex didn't make mistakes. His instincts were finely tuned instruments of survival and service, honed by generations of breeding and months of intensive training. Daniel keyed his radio with trembling fingers. Dispatch. This is Unit 7. I need to report a suspicious package at the Maple Street bus stop, requesting backup and the bomb squad. The dispatcher's voice crackled back through the static. Unit 7. Can you describe the nature of the suspicious package? Daniel looked down at Rex, who hadn't moved a muscle, still locked in his intense focus on the suitcase. It's an old suitcase. My K9 partner is exhibiting unusual behavior. I believe we may have a situation here. Pause. Roger, Unit 7. Backup is en route. Maintain safe distance and secure the perimeter A's. Daniel stretched yellow caution tape around the area. A few early risers began to gather. Mrs. Henderson from the diner across the street clutching her coffee mug with worried eyes. Old Pete from the hardware store squinting through his thick glasses, And Maria Santos, the young mother who worked the morning shift at the post office, her face creased with concern. "What's going on, Officer Hayes?" Mrs. Henderson called, out her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived in Millstone for 67 years and had seen everything the town had to offer. "Just a precaution, ma'am," Daniel replied, but his eyes never left Rex. The dog had begun a slow circle around, the suitcase maintaining a careful distance while his nose worked overtime. Whatever was inside that case, it was telling Rex a story, one that reached back through time, carrying with it the weight of secrets that Millstone had kept buried for far too long. The wind shifted slightly, rustling the leaves of the old oak tree that shaded the bus stop, and Daniel caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. Barely visible beneath the accumulated dust and grime scratched into the leather of the suitcase were initials, SM 1987. 37 years ago. Daniel had been just a child then, but even now those numbers sparked a memory he couldn't quite grasp, something about that year that had left its mark on Millstone, a shadow that had never quite lifted from the town's collective consciousness. Rex finally looked up at him, those intelligent amber eyes holding depths of knowledge that Daniel desperately wished he could access. The dog's expression seemed to say, "This is important. This changes everything. Are you ready for what we're about to uncover?" As the wail of approaching sirens began to echo through the morning air, Daniel placed a gentle hand on Rex's head, feeling the tension thrumming through the dog's powerful frame. Whatever secrets lay inside that battered suitcase, they were about to learn that some mysteries refuse to stay buried forever, and that sometimes it takes the unwavering instincts of a loyal dog to lead us back to truths we never knew we were searching for. The suitcase sat silent and patient, as if it had been waiting for this moment for this team, for this particular morning when the mist would lift and the light would finally shine on whatever darkness it contained. Rex remained perfectly still, a living sentinel standing guard over secrets that were about to reshape everything they thought they knew about their quiet little town. The smell hit Daniel as soon as he knelt beside the suitcase, a mixture of rust, old paper, and something else he couldn't quite place. Something organic and unsettling that made his stomach clench. Rex's growl deepened, a rumbling bass note that seemed to vibrate through the morning air, and Daniel noticed the dog's hackles were beginning to rise along his spine. Behind the yellow tape, the small crowd had grown. Word traveled fast in Millstone, faster than their outdated cell towers and spotty internet service. People emerged from their homes in bathrobes and slippers, drawn by the magnetic pull of something finally happening in their sleepy town. But Daniel noticed something else in their faces, not just curiosity but recognition, fear. As if the sight of that old suitcase had awakened memories they'd worked hard to forget. "Sweet Jesus," whispered Pete, his weathered hands gripping the hardware store's porch railing. "Ain't seen one of them old cases in years. Looks just like he trailed off, shaking his head as if dispelling unwanted thoughts." Mrs. Henderson moved closer to the tape, her coffee mug forgotten, and cooling in her hands. "Officer Hayes," she called, her voice unusually strained. "Where exactly did you find that thing?" "Right where it is, ma'am," Daniel replied, without looking up from Rex, who was now sniffing the air in short, deliberate bursts. "Why? Does it look familiar?" The silence that followed was so complete that Daniel could hear the distant rumble of the approaching emergency vehicles still several minutes away. When Mrs. Henderson finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. 1987, she said, and Daniel felt Rex's entire body tense beside him. That was the year little Sarah Morrison went missing. Just vanished one day on her way home from school. They searched for months. Every house, every field, every abandoned building. In a 50-mile radius, never found so much as a thread from her dress. Daniel's blood ran cold. SM 1987, Sarah Morrison. Her mama, Mrs. Henderson, continued, her eyes fixed on the suitcase with something approaching horror. She used to pack Sarah's little brown suitcase every summer for camp. Taught her to put her initials on everything just like her daddy did when he traveled for work. A tear slipped down the elderly woman's cheek. Dorothy Morrison never got over losing that child. Died of a broken heart. Just 5 years later. Rex whimpered again, that same complex sound Daniel had heard earlier, recognition mixed. With sorrow, the dog began to pace back and forth along the perimeter. Daniel had established his nose, never leaving the trail of whatever scent had captured his attention. It was as if Rex was trying to follow an invisible path, one that led away, from the suitcase and deeper into the town's forgotten corners. There were rumors, Pete said suddenly, his voice gravelly with age and cigarettes. Things people whispered about but never said out loud, about why the search got called off so sudden-like. About certain folks who didn't want too many questions asked. Maria Santos shifted uncomfortably, bouncing her infant son against her shoulder. My grandmother used to tell stories, she said hesitantly, about children who disappeared and about people in town who made sure no one looked too hard for answers. She said there were those who had secrets to keep, and they kept them by any means necessary. Daniel stood slowly, his mind racing. He'd grown up in Millstone, had heard the whispered stories, and half-forgotten tragedies that every small town carries like scars. But he'd been just 8 years old in 1987, more concerned with baseball cards and Saturday morning cartoons than the adult mysteries that shadowed his hometown. Now looking at the faces gathered around the bus stop, he realized he was seeing something he'd never noticed before, the weight of collective guilt, of questions never asked, and truths never spoken. Rex had stopped pacing and was staring directly at Daniel, those amber eyes holding an urgency that made the officer's heart race. The dog lifted his muzzle toward the old oak tree that shaded the bus stop, then back to the suitcase, then to Daniel, over and over the same sequence as if he was trying to communicate something vital. What is it, boy? Daniel asked, following Rex's gaze to the tree. What are you trying to tell me? That's when he saw it, carved into the oak's ancient bark, so weathered and overgrown with moss that it was nearly invisible. SM plus BK Friends. Forever. The letters were childlike, probably carved with a pocket knife by small, inexperienced hands. Below the inscription, someone had scratched a crude heart, and below that, a date, summer 1987 BK. Daniel murmured and saw Mrs. Henderson's face go, "Pale Billy Kramer," she whispered. He was Sarah's best friend. They were inseparable that summer, spent every day together, exploring the woods, building forts, making grand plans for the future. Her voice broke. Billy was the last one to see her alive. Said, she was heading home with her little suitcase, talking about showing her mama something special she'd found in the woods. Rex barked once, sharp and urgent, and Daniel spun around to see the German shepherd standing rigid beside the suitcase, his tail bristled and his ears pinned back. The dog was looking not at the case itself, but at something beyond it, a figure emerging from the morning shadows on the far side of the street. An elderly man walked slowly toward them, his gait uneven and his face partially hidden beneath a faded baseball cap. As he drew closer, Daniel could see the tears streaming down weathered cheeks, and recognition dawned with cold certainty. Billy Kramer. Mrs. Henderson breathed. Dear God, it's Billy, the man who had been Sarah. Morrison's best friend 37 years ago stopped at the edge of the yellow tape, his entire body shaking as he stared at the suitcase. Rex's growl had faded to a low whine, and the dog's aggressive posture had shifted to something that looked almost like sympathy. I've been waiting, Billy said, his voice cracked with decades of pain. Waiting for someone to find it. Waiting for someone to finally ask the right questions. He looked up at Daniel with eyes that held the weight of a lifetime's worth of secrets. That dog of yours, he knows, doesn't he? He can sense what the rest of us have been too scared to face. Daniel felt the world shift around him as if the very foundations of his understanding were crumbling. This wasn't just an abandoned suitcase, it was a time capsule, a message from the past that had been waiting patiently for the right moment to resurface, and Rex, with his incredible instincts and unwavering loyalty, had been chosen as the messenger to finally bring truth to light. The sirens were getting closer now, but Daniel barely heard them. All his attention was focused on Billy Kramer's tear-stained face and the way Rex had positioned himself between the old man and the suitcase, not as a guard, but as a bridge between past and present, between secrets and truth, between the child who had carried terrible knowledge for 37 years and the moment when that knowledge could finally be shared. "Tell me," Daniel said softly, his hand resting on Rex's head for strength. "Tell me what really happened to Sarah Morrison." The emergency vehicles arrived in a convoy of flashing lights and urgent purpose, but Chief Walker stepped out of his patrol car with the resigned expression of a man who'd been interrupted from his morning coffee for what he clearly believed was another false alarm. His weathered face, marked by 30 years of small-town policing, showed barely concealed irritation as he surveyed the scene. The yellow tape, the gathered crowd, and most pointedly, the old suitcase that had caused all the commotion. Hayes' Chief Walker called out his voice, carrying the authority of rank and the weariness of experience. "What exactly are we dealing with here?" Dispatch said something about a suspicious package, but all I see is garbage, someone dumped at a bus stop. Daniel felt Rex shift beside him, the dog's muscles tensing as if sensing the dismissive tone in the chief's voice. "Sir, my K9 partner detected something significant about this suitcase." "His behavior." "Indicates his behavior?" Chief Walker interrupted, his pale eyes narrowing. "Indicates that you've been spending too much time anthropomorphizing that animal dogs, smell things, Hayes, old food, dead animals, who knows what. It doesn't mean every piece of trash is a federal case." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow. He'd served under Chief Walker for 8 years, had earned commendations and the respect of his fellow officers, but moments like this reminded him why he'd never felt truly accepted. In the department, Walker was old school, from an era when police work meant gut instincts and hard experience, not canine partnerships and modern investigative techniques. Chief Daniel said, his voice carefully controlled, "Rex has an impeccable record. He's saved lives, detected weapons, located missing persons. When he reacts like this, there's always a reason. And how many times has that reason turned out to be a dead squirrel or someone's forgotten lunch?" Walker's tone was condescending, designed to cut Daniel down in front of the growing crowd of onlookers. "I'm not wasting city resources on bomb squad call-outs because your dog got excited about garbage Rex," whimpered softly, and Daniel felt the familiar stab of doubt that had haunted him. Since the Morrison case 3 years ago, not Sarah Morrison, but her distant cousin Jennifer, a teenager who'd gone missing during Daniel's 2nd year with Rex. They'd searched for days, following Rex's leads through the woods outside town, but when they'd finally found Jennifer's body in a shallow grave, Daniel learned she'd been dead for weeks. The family had blamed him for giving them false hope, for following what they called wild hunches instead of proper police work. That failure had nearly broken him. The guilt of raising expectations, of believing so completely in Rex's abilities, only to deliver devastating news to a grieving family, had made Daniel question everything about his methods. Even now, standing beside the suitcase that had captured Rex's attention so completely, he could hear Jennifer Morrison's father screaming at him, "Your damn dog led us on a wild goose chase while my daughter was already dead." Sir Daniel tried again, his voice betraying the uncertainty that gnawed at him. "I understand your concerns, but Billy Kramer just identified this suitcase as potentially belonging to Sarah Morrison. Mrs. Henderson confirmed the timeline, and there are initials carved into the leather that match. Billy Kramer is 73 years old and hasn't been right in the head since Vietnam," Chief Walker snapped. and Henderson's been spreading gossip since before you were born. You're basing a major investigation on the word of a shell-shocked veteran and a busybody plus whatever. Imaginary signals you think you're getting from a German shepherd. The crowd behind the yellow tape had grown silent. Sensing the tension between the two officers, Daniel could feel their eyes on him weighing his credibility against the chief's skepticism. Rex pressed closer to his leg, offering silent support, but even that comfort couldn't completely dispel the creeping fear that he was wrong, that his faith in his partner was just wishful thinking dressed up as police work. But then Rex did something unexpected. The German shepherd walked deliberately to the suitcase, sat down beside it, and looked directly at Chief Walker. His tail didn't wag his ears, didn't perk with excitement. Instead, he maintained perfect professional composure while never breaking eye contact with the chief. It was a behavior Daniel had seen only once before during their certification testing when Rex had been required to maintain focus on a target despite distractions and challenges from the evaluators. "This dog has saved lives," before Daniel said, his voice growing stronger as he watched Rex's unwavering demonstration of confidence. "He's detected explosives that could have killed innocent people. He's found missing children who were still alive. Because we followed his leads. His record speaks for itself, and right now he's telling us that this suitcase contains something important." Chief Walker's expression softened slightly, though his tone remained skeptical. "And what if you're wrong?" "What? If we shut down half the street call in specialized units and waste thousands of dollars in resources because a dog smelled an old sandwich?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Daniel felt the weight of his past failure pressing down on him. What if he was wrong? What if his desperate need to prove Rex's worth was clouding his judgment? What if the grief and guilt from the Jennifer Morrison case had made him see significance where none existed? But as these doubts swirled through his mind, Rex remained perfectly still beside the suitcase, his amber eyes holding a clarity and certainty that Daniel had learned to trust above his own instincts. This wasn't excitement or random interest. This was professional focus, the kind of intense concentration Rex displayed only when something truly important demanded his attention. Chief Daniel said quietly, 3 years ago, I doubted Rex's instincts because I was afraid of being wrong. A family paid the price for my hesitation. I won't make that mistake again." The reference to the Jennifer Morrison case made Chief Walker's jaw tighten. He'd been the one to field the angry phone calls from the family, the one to face the media questions about police competence and wasted resources. But he'd also been there when Rex had successfully located 2 other missing persons, when the dog's abilities had meant the difference between life and death. Rex whimpered again, but this time the sound was different, not uncertain or seeking, approval but urgent, almost pleading. The dog's eyes shifted between Daniel and the chief as if he understood that his partner's career and reputation hung in the balance of this moment. 30 minutes, Chief Walker said finally. You get 30 minutes, with the bomb squad. If they don't find anything significant, this investigation ends here and you owe the city an explanation for the expense. Daniel nodded, relief flooding through him, even as the pressure mounted. 30 minutes to vindicate not just Rex's instincts, but his own faith in their partnership. 30 minutes to prove that some truths are worth uncovering regardless of the cost. As the bomb squad technicians approached with their specialized equipment, Rex stood up and moved too, Daniel's side pressing his warm flank against his partner's leg. The dog's presence was a reminder that doubt was a luxury they couldn't afford, not when the truth was finally within reach, waiting inside a battered suitcase that had kept its secrets. For 37 years, the suitcase sat silent under the morning sun patient as a gravestone, while around it the machinery of justice slowly ground into motion. Whatever it contained, Daniel knew their lives were about to change forever, and for the First time since the Jennifer Morrison case, he was ready to face whatever truth Rex had led him to discover. The bomb squad's robot approached the suitcase with mechanical precision, its articulated arm extending toward the brass latches that had remained closed for decades. Daniel stood behind the blast shield with Rex at his side, both of them watching the small monitor that displayed the robot's camera feed. The German Shepherd's tail was motionless, his breathing controlled and focused, as if he understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. "Latches are corroded but intact," reported Sergeant Martinez, the bomb squad leader, her voice crackling through the radio. No obvious signs of tampering or explosive devices from external. Examination. "We're going to attempt opening now." The crowd behind the extended perimeter had grown to nearly half the town. Daniel could see faces he'd known since childhood, teachers, shopkeepers, neighbors, all drawn by the magnetic pull of a mystery, finally being solved. But their expressions weren't just curious. There was an underlying tension, as if they were afraid of what might be revealed. Chief Walker stood apart from the crowd, his arms crossed and his face set in skeptical lines. But Daniel noticed that even the chief couldn't look away from the monitor as the robot's manipulator arms worked on the ancient latches. The first latch gave way with a metallic groan that seemed to echo through the morning air. Rex's ears perked forward, and he took a single step toward the monitor, his nose twitching as if he could smell whatever was inside the case from 50 yards away. "First latch is open," Martinez reported, moving to the second latch now. The second latch proved more stubborn, requiring several attempts before it finally surrendered to the robot's persistent manipulation. When it clicked open, Rex let out a low whine that sent chills down Daniel's spine. Not a sound of excitement or anticipation, but something that conveyed deep, ancient sorrow. Both latches are open, beginning lid examination and opening procedure. The robot's camera captured every detail as the lid slowly lifted, revealing the suitcase's contents to daylight for the first time in 37 years. What they saw made the entire assembled crowd gasp in unison, and Daniel felt his knees go weak. There, carefully folded and preserved by the case's sealed environment, was a child's sweater pale yellow with tiny blue flowers sized for someone no more than 10 years old. But it wasn't pristine. Dark stains marked the fabric, and Daniel didn't need forensic training to recognize what those stains likely were. Beneath the sweater, a collection of photographs had been carefully arranged. The robot's camera zoomed in, revealing black and white snapshots of children playing in the woods, building forts exploring the very areas where Daniel and Rex conducted their patrols today. In several of the photos, two children featured prominently: a dark-haired girl with pigtails and a freckled boy with a gap-toothed grin, Sarah Morrison and Billy Kramer. Mrs. Henderson whispered from behind the tape, her voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. "Look at them. They couldn't have been more than 10 years old." But it was the third item that made Chief Walker's skeptical expression crumble into something approaching horror. Nestled beneath the photographs, tarnished but unmistakable, was a police badge. The robot's camera focused on the shield, revealing a number and a name that sent shockwaves through the assembled crowd. Badge number 47, Officer Thomas Henley. Jesus Christ, Chief Walker breathed, his face going pale. Tom Henley was my training officer. He worked the Sarah Morrison case, was one of the lead investigators before. He trailed off, his eyes wide with implications he clearly didn't want to face. Daniel remembered hearing stories about Officer Henley, respected member of the department who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances in 1988. Just months after the Sarah Morrison investigation had been officially closed, the official story was that he'd suffered a breakdown, left his badge and gun on his kitchen table, and simply vanished. Some said he'd started a new life somewhere else. Others whispered darker theories about what might have driven a good cop to disappear. Rex was pacing now, his agitation growing as more scents were released from the open suitcase. The dog's nose worked overtime processing layers of information. That painted a story Daniel was only beginning to understand. Suddenly, Rex barked once, sharp and urgent, and began pulling toward the woods that bordered the bus stop area. "There's more," Daniel said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Rex is telling us this isn't the whole story. This suitcase, it's not just evidence, it's a message. Message." Sergeant Martinez's voice crackled through the radio again. "There's something else in here. Looks like it's a letter, sealed envelope addressed to a pause. It's addressed to whoever finally finds this." The implications hit Daniel like a physical blow. This wasn't a random dump site or an attempt to hide evidence. Someone had deliberately placed these items in the suitcase and left it where it would eventually be found. The question was, who? And why now, after all these years? Rex's behavior was becoming more insistent. The dog was alternating between staring at the suitcase and pulling toward the forest, his message clear. There were more secrets to uncover, more pieces of the puzzle waiting to be discovered. Billy Kramer, who had remained silent since the suitcase was opened, suddenly spoke up, his voice cracked with emotion. He said he'd make sure the truth came out someday, even if it killed him, even if it took forever. "Who said that, Mr. Kramer?" Daniel asked gently. "Tom Henley Billy," replied, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "The night before he disappeared. He came to my house, told me he knew what really happened to Sarah, said he had proof, but that there were people in town who would kill to keep it quiet. He said he was going to hide the evidence somewhere safe. Somewhere it would eventually be found by someone who could do something about it." The crowd was silent, processing the implications of what they were hearing. This wasn't just a cold case being reopened. It was the unveiling of a conspiracy that had roots deep in their community's past. Rex barked again, more urgently this time, and Daniel made a decision that would change everything. "We need to follow Rex's lead," he announced. "This suitcase is just the beginning. There's more evidence out there, and Rex knows where to find it." Chief Walker looked torn between professional skepticism and the undeniable weight of what they'd already discovered. "Hayes, I can't authorize a full-scale search based on On what?" Daniel interrupted, his confidence growing with every passing moment. "Based on the discovery of evidence in a 37-year-old murder case? Based on finding a missing police officer's badge along with a child's blood-stained clothing? Chief, Rex didn't just find an old suitcase. He found the key to the biggest cover-up in Millstone's history." Rex pressed against Daniel's leg, his warm presence a reminder that justice sometimes comes through the most unexpected channels. The dog's amber eyes held a depth of understanding that transcended species, a recognition that some truths are too important to remain buried forever. As the crime scene photographers documented every detail of the suitcase's contents, and as the forensics team prepared to transport the evidence for analysis, Daniel felt a shift in the air around them. The secrets that had poisoned Millstone for nearly 4 decades were finally beginning to surface, and Rex, with his unwavering instincts and absolute loyalty, had become the catalyst for a reckoning that was long overdue. The letter addressed to whoever finally finds. This would soon reveal its contents, but Daniel already knew that their investigation was just beginning. Rex's agitation and focus on the surrounding woods made it clear that more evidence waited to be discovered, more truth waited to be uncovered, and for the first time since the Jennifer Morrison case, Daniel felt absolutely certain that he and Rex were exactly where they needed to be, doing exactly what they were meant to do. By noon, the news had spread through Millstone like wildfire carried by cell phones, whispered conversations, and the kind of small-town gossip network that could relay information faster than any official communication system. The police station, normally a quiet outpost where the most exciting events were parking tickets and noise complaints, had become a hive of activity that Daniel had never seen in his 8 years on the force. Families began arriving within hours of the suitcase discovery. They came clutching old photographs, missing person reports, and decades-old pain that had never fully healed Margaret Porter, whose 12-year-old son had vanished in 1989, sat in the station's waiting area with trembling hands, hope and fear warring in her weathered features. Beside her, Robert Chen held a faded school picture of his daughter Amy, who had disappeared while walking home from a friend's house in 1983. There were others. Margaret whispered to Daniel as he passed through the lobby with Rex at his side. "We tried to tell people, tried to get someone to listen, but they said our children were runaways, said they'd probably turn up eventually." Her voice broke. "It's been 34 years, Amy Chen, my David Sarah Morrison. How many more were there that we don't even know about?" Rex paused beside Margaret's chair, and the grieving mother reached out tentatively to stroke the German shepherd's head. The dog remained perfectly still, allowing her touch while his intelligent eyes seemed to register her pain. It was a moment of connection that transcended species recognition between two souls who understood the weight of loss and the desperate need for answers. Daniel felt the emotional impact of these encounters like physical blows. Each family represented a failure of the system he'd sworn to serve a truth that had been buried beneath bureaucracy and willful blindness. The letter from Officer Henley's suitcase had been rushed to analysis, but preliminary examination revealed enough to confirm everyone's worst fears. There had been a systematic cover-up involving multiple missing children, and it reached into the highest levels of local government and law enforcement as evening approached. Daniel found himself alone in his patrol car, with Rex parked outside the station, while the weight of the day's revelations pressed down on him like a physical force. The German shepherd seemed to sense his partner's emotional state, resting his muzzle on Daniel's shoulder in a gesture of comfort that had sustained them through 3 years of partnership. "What have we gotten ourselves into, boy?" Daniel murmured, scratching behind Rex's ears. "These families, they're counting on us to find answers that have been hidden for decades. What if we can't deliver? What if the trail's too cold, the cover-up too complete?" Rex's response was a soft whimper and a gentle nudge with his nose, as if to say that doubt was a luxury they couldn't afford. The dog's unwavering confidence had become Daniel's anchor in the growing storm of revelations and implications that threatened to overwhelm them both. A soft tap on the car window made Daniel look up to see an elderly woman standing in the station parking lot, her silver hair gleaming under the streetlights. She moved with the careful dignity of someone who had lived through great pain, but refused to be broken by it. When Daniel rolled down his window, she spoke, in a voice that was steady, despite the tears in her eyes. "Officer Hayes? My name is Marlena Henley. Tom Henley was my brother." Daniel's heart skipped. He quickly got out of the car, Rex following close behind Mrs. Henley. "I'm so sorry for your loss. We're still trying to understand what happened to your brother, but finding his badge today, I know what happened to Tom." Marlena interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "I've known for 37 years, but I was too afraid to speak up. Too afraid of what they'd do to me and my family if I told the truth." Rex moved closer to Marlena, his behavior shifting into what Daniel recognized as protection mode, not aggressive but alert, and ready to defend someone he perceived as vulnerable. The dog's instincts about people were rarely wrong, and his immediate acceptance of Marlena told Daniel that she was someone they could trust. "What did happen to your brother, Mrs. Henley?" Marlena looked around nervously, as if afraid they were being watched even in the relative privacy of the parking lot. Tom discovered that some of the missing children weren't runaways or random disappearances. They were being taken by someone the children trusted, someone who had access and authority. When he started asking the wrong questions, getting too close to the truth, he was warned to back off. Warned by who? By people who had everything to lose if the truth came out. Tom told me he had evidence, photographs, documents, recordings, but he knew he couldn't trust anyone in the department. He said there were people involved who could make evidence disappear, witnesses vanish, investigations get buried under paperwork and bureaucracy. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine, so he hid the evidence. He created a kind of insurance policy. Marlena nodded. Multiple caches of evidence hidden around town with clues leading from one to the next. He said if anything happened to him eventually, someone would find the trail and be able to piece together the whole story. She looked down at Rex, who was sitting perfectly still beside her. His amber eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that suggested he understood every word. Tom always said that the truth has a way of surfacing when the right person comes along to find it. I think your dog might be that catalyst he was waiting for. The implications were staggering. If Officer Henley had created multiple evidence caches, then the suitcase at the bus stop was just the beginning. Rex's agitated behavior and his repeated focus on the surrounding woods suddenly made perfect sense. The dog was picking up scent trails that led to more hidden evidence. More pieces of a puzzle that had been deliberately scattered across Millstone. Mrs. Henley Daniel said carefully, "Do you know where your brother might have hidden the other evidence?" Marlena shook her head, but her expression suggested she wasn't telling the complete truth. Tom was careful not to tell me specifics. He said it was safer for everyone. If only he knew the exact locations. But he did mention that he chose places that were meaningful to the children who disappeared, places where they played, where they felt safe, where their memories would help guide the truth to light. Rex suddenly stood up, his attention shifting to something beyond the parking lot. Daniel followed the dog's gaze and saw a figure watching them from across the street, a man in dark clothing who quickly melted back into the shadows when he realized he'd been spotted. The German Shepherd's hackles rose slightly and a low growl rumbled in his chest. "We're being watched," Daniel said quietly. Marlena's face went pale. "They know I'm here. They know I'm talking to you." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Officer Hayes, you have to understand, these people have had 37 years to cover their tracks to establish themselves in positions of power and influence. They won't hesitate to eliminate threats to their security. Who are they? Mrs. Henley? Give me names." "Can't," she said, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Not here. Not in the open like this. But I can tell you this. The corruption goes deeper than you imagine. It's not just one person or even a small group. It's a network that includes people you trust, people. You work with people who have been hiding in plain sight for decades." Rex's growling intensified, and Daniel realized they needed to move this conversation somewhere safer. "Mrs. Henley, would you be willing to come to the station? We can provide protection while you tell us what you know." "The station?" Marlena laughed bitterly. "Officer Hayes, my brother was killed because he trusted the wrong person in that station. How do I know you're not part of the same network that destroyed him?" It was a fair question, and one that Daniel couldn't answer with complete certainty. If the corruption was as widespread as Marlena suggested, then anyone could be compromised. But Rex's calm acceptance of the woman combined with his own instincts told Daniel that she was genuine, a frightened witness who had carried a terrible secret for most of her adult life. "Because Rex trusts you," Daniel said simply. "And in 3 years of partnership, his judgment about people has never been wrong." Marlena looked down at the German Shepherd, who had moved to stand protectively between her and the street where the mysterious figure had been watching. Rex's posture was alert, but not aggressive toward her. He was guarding her, not guarding against her. "There's a place," she said finally, "an old cabin in the woods behind Miller's Pond. Tom used to take me there when we were children. If you meet me there tomorrow at dawn, I'll tell you everything I know, but come alone and trust no one else with the location." Daniel nodded, understanding the gravity of what she was asking. "Mrs. Henley, are you going to be safe tonight? "I've been hiding this secret for 37 years," she replied with a sad smile. "I think I can manage one more night. But Officer Hayes, when we open this door, there's no closing it again. The people responsible for these disappearances have killed to protect their secret. They won't hesitate to kill again." As Marlena disappeared into the night, moving with the practiced stealth of someone who had spent decades looking over her shoulder, Daniel felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. Rex pressed against his leg, offering silent support. But even the dog's presence couldn't completely dispel the fear that they were walking into something much larger and more dangerous than a simple missing person case. Back at the station, Daniel filed his report with careful omission. She mentioned meeting with Marlena Henley, but left out the specifics of their conversation and the planned meeting at the cabin. If corruption ran as deep as she suggested, then operational security was paramount. He and Rex would have to navigate this investigation with the assumption that anyone could be compromised. Anyone could be working for the network that had successfully buried the truth for nearly 4 decades. As he prepared to leave for the night, Chief Walker approached with an expression that Daniel couldn't quite read, part concern, part warning, part something else entirely. "Hayes," the chief said quietly, "I've been getting calls all evening. Important people in this town are nervous about what we might uncover. They're suggesting that we should turn this investigation over to state authorities. Let someone else handle the political ramifications." "And what do you think, Chief?" Walker was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face reflecting the internal struggle between duty and self-preservation. "I think," he said finally, "that sometimes the right thing to do is also the most dangerous thing to do. And I think you and that dog of yours have stumbled onto something that's going to test every principle we swore to uphold when we pinned on these badges." Rex looked up at Chief Walker with those intelligent amber eyes, and Daniel saw something pass between them. A recognition that they were all about to face a trial that would define not just their careers, but their integrity as human beings. The shadows of Millstone were beginning to reveal their secrets, and Daniel knew that by tomorrow night nothing in their quiet town would ever be the same again. Dawn broke gray and misty over Miller's Pond, the kind of morning that seemed designed for secrets and whispered revelations. Daniel had arrived early, parking his patrol car at the old fishing access road and walking the last quarter-mile through the woods with Rex at his side. The German shepherd moved with purpose through the undergrowth, his nose constantly working, as he processed the layered scents of the forest, but Daniel could tell that Rex was tracking something specific, something that called to his trained instincts. The cabin materialized out of the morning fog like something from a ghost story, weathered. Wood silvered with age, windows dark and empty as dead eyes, the roof sagging under the weight of neglect and time. Weeds had grown up around the foundation, and poison ivy claimed the walls in verdant tangles, but the structure remained solid enough to have sheltered secrets for decades. Marlena Henley was already there, sitting on what remained of the front porch steps with a manila envelope clutched in her weathered hands. She looked older in the morning light, as if the decision to finally speak the truth had aged her overnight, but her eyes held a clarity and determination that Daniel recognized, the look of someone who had finally decided to stop running from the past. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said as Daniel and Rex approached. "Gave my word," Daniel replied, settling beside her on the steps while Rex began a methodical exploration of the cabin's perimeter, and Rex seemed to know exactly where to find this place. "He led us here as if he'd been before." Marlena smiled sadly. "Dogs remember things. We forget. This cabin has seen a lot of pain over the years. Maybe your Rex can sense the echoes of what happened here." Rex had indeed found something. The German shepherd was standing beside what looked like an old well, his posture rigid with attention. But as Daniel watched, he realized it wasn't a well at all. It was some kind of covered pit or root cellar, its wooden cover partially rotted and concealed beneath years of fallen leaves. "That's where Tom hid the first cachet," Marlena said, following Daniel's gaze. He said if anything happened to him, the evidence would be found when the time was right, when someone came along who could handle the truth. Daniel approached the concealed cellar with Rex, both of them moving carefully on the uncertain ground. The wooden cover was more solid than it appeared, held in place by a simple latch mechanism that had been protected from the weather by its position beneath the debris. When Daniel lifted the cover, Rex immediately began circling the opening, his nose working overtime to process the scents rising from below. Inside the cellar, wrapped in plastic and protected from moisture, was a metal box, the kind used to store important documents. Daniel lifted it carefully, noting that it was surprisingly heavy, and carried it back to where Marlena waited. 37 years, she whispered as Daniel set the box between them. 37 years. I've wondered what Tom found that was worth dying for. The box opened with a metallic click that seemed to echo through the morning stillness. Inside, wrapped in protective plastic, were photographs, dozens of them carefully organized and labeled with dates and locations. But these weren't the innocent childhood snapshots they'd found in the suitcase. These were surveillance photos taken with a telephoto lens from hidden positions, documenting activities that made Daniel's blood run cold. The photos showed children, some he recognized as Sarah Morrison, and others who matched the descriptions of missing kids from the growing list at the station. But they weren't alone in the pictures. The children were with adults, people Daniel recognized from around town, business leaders, church officials, even what looked like law enforcement officers, all engaged in activities that spoke to a conspiracy far more organized and extensive than he'd imagined. Dear God, Daniel breathed, his hands shaking as he processed what he was seeing. How many people were involved in this? Tom estimated at least a dozen active participants. Marlena said, her voice hollow with old pain. But there were others who knew and said nothing, others who helped cover it up after the fact. By the time he'd gathered enough evidence to act, Tom realized he couldn't trust anyone in official positions. The network had too much influence, too many connections. Rex had returned from his exploration of the cabin and was now sitting perfectly still beside Daniel, his amber eyes fixed on the photographs with an intensity that suggested he understood their significance. The dog's presence was a reminder that justice sometimes comes through unexpected channels, that truth has a way of surfacing when the right catalyst appears. Among the photographs, Daniel found documents, financial records showing payments to various individuals, correspondence between conspiracy members discussing problems and solutions, and most damning of all, a detailed log kept by Officer Henley documenting his investigation's progress and the threats he'd received as he got closer to the truth. The last entry in Tom's log is dated 2 days before he disappeared, Marlena said, pointing to a page near the bottom of the stack. He wrote that he'd been contacted by someone claiming to want to help, someone who said they could provide protection and assistance in bringing the conspiracy to light. Tom was suspicious, but he was also desperate. He'd been carrying this burden alone for months. Daniel read the final entry in Officer Henley's careful handwriting. Meeting arranged for tomorrow night at the old quarry contact, claims to have insider information and resources to ensure safe prosecution of all involved parties. Still don't trust the situation, but maybe our only chance to save the remaining children and bring justice for those already lost. If something happens to me, follow the trail I've established. The truth must not die with me. He was murdered, Daniel said, stating what they both knew, to be fact and made to disappear so thoroughly that even his body was never found, Marlena confirmed. The official story about a mental breakdown and voluntary disappearance was just the final insult to his memory. Rex suddenly stood up, his attention focused on something moving through the woods around the cabin. Daniel heard it tooth snap of branches, the rustle of leaves that suggested someone was approaching their location. The German shepherd's hackles rose slightly, and he positioned himself between Daniel and the direction of the sound. We need to go, Marlena said urgently. gathering up the photographs and documents. Tom said this place would be safe, but if they've been watching you since yesterday, Daniel helped her secure the evidence, back in its protective wrapping. But before they could close the metal box, Rex barked once, a sharp warning that froze them both in place. Through the morning mist, Daniel could see movement in the trees, multiple figures approaching from different directions with the coordinated precision of a planned operation run. Daniel told Marlena, pushing the box into her hands, "Take the evidence and get to the state police. Don't trust anyone local. The corruption goes too deep." But even as he spoke, Daniel realized they were surrounded. The figures in the woods had positioned themselves to cut off all escape routes, and the morning that had begun with the promise of revelation was quickly turning into a trap that had been 37 years in the making. Rex pressed against Daniel's leg, his body tense and ready for action. The dog's loyalty was absolute. He would fight to protect his partner regardless of the odds, but Daniel could see that they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered by people who had spent decades perfecting the art of silencing threats to their secret. The shadows of Millstone's past were finally taking physical form, stepping out of the mist with the kind of calm confidence that came from having successfully buried the truth for nearly 4 decades. But they hadn't counted on one variable in their calculations, the unwavering instincts of a German shepherd who understood that some truths are too important to remain hidden, regardless of the cost. As the first figure emerged clearly from the tree line, Daniel recognized him with a shock that sent his world spinning. Chief Walker, holding a service weapon and wearing the expression of a man who had run out of alternatives. "I'm sorry," Hayes the chief said, his voice heavy with what might have been genuine regret, "but some secrets are too dangerous to let surface. Too many important people have too much to lose." Rex's growl deepened to a rumble that seemed to shake the morning air, and Daniel realized that their investigation had just become a fight for survival, one that would determine not just their own fate, but the fate of truth itself in the town they'd both sworn to protect. The standoff at the cabin lasted only seconds, but those seconds stretched like hours in Daniel's mind as he processed the betrayal and calculated their options. Chief Walker stood 20 yards away with his weapon drawn, backed by 3 other men who moved with the disciplined coordination of people accustomed to violence. Rex remained perfectly still beside Daniel, every muscle coiled and ready, waiting for the command that would unleash 3 years of training and a lifetime of protective instincts. "Just give us the evidence." Hayes Chief Walker said, his voice carrying the weariness of a man who had spent decades compromising his principles one small step at a time. "Walk away from this. Take early retirement, relocate somewhere far from Millstone, and forget everything you've seen. You and that dog can live quiet. Live somewhere else, like Officer Henley did?" Daniel replied, his hand resting on Rex's head, both for comfort and as a signal to stay ready. "Like all those missing children did?" Walker's face tightened. Tom Henley was a good cop who stumbled onto something bigger than he could handle. He had chances to walk away, chances to let sleeping dogs lie. He made his choice. Marlena Henley clutched the metal box tighter to her chest, her face pale but determined. "You killed my brother because he wouldn't let you continue hurting children. Your brother died because he couldn't understand that some systems are too big to fight," Walker replied. "The network he discovered provides services to very important people with the power to destroy entire communities if their interests are threatened. A few missing children from broken homes was a small price to pay for stability and prosperity." Rex's growl deepened, and Daniel felt the dog's revulsion at Walker's words. The German shepherd's moral compass was simpler and cleaner than the complex justifications humans use to excuse their failures. Right was right, wrong was wrong, and protecting the innocent was worth any sacrifice. "How long?" Daniel asked, his voice barely controlled. "How long have you been part of this?" "Since the beginning," Walker admitted someone had to coordinate with law enforcement, make sure investigations went nowhere, ensure that evidence disappeared when necessary. I told myself I was protecting the town from scandal, preventing panic and economic collapse. The tourism. The federal grants, the new businesses, all of that would have vanished if the truth came out. Daniel felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place, the cases that were closed too quickly, the evidence that went missing from storage, the witnesses who suddenly became unreliable or decided not to cooperate. Walker hadn't just been covering up crimes, he'd been actively facilitating them for decades. The Jennifer Morrison case. Daniel said, understanding flooding through him, you made sure we found her too late. You delayed the search, misdirected the investigation. Walker's expression didn't change. Jennifer Morrison was already dead when she disappeared. Cancer was going to kill her within months anyway. Her death served a larger purpose. It discredited your methods, made people doubt the reliability of K-9 investigations. We needed you to lose confidence in your abilities. Rex sensed the rising tension and took a protective step forward, positioning himself between Daniel and the armed men. The dog's intelligence was evident in how he assessed the tactical situation, multiple threats, limited cover, but also the advantage of surprise and superior speed. But you made a mistake, Daniel said, his confidence growing, as he watched Rex's calm preparation. You underestimated what we'd find in that suitcase. You thought it was just Tom Henley trying to send a message, but you didn't realize he'd created a trail of evidence that would lead us directly to you. The trail ends here, Walker said, raising his weapon. The evidence disappears. You and Mrs. Henley have an unfortunate accident, and Millstone goes back to being a quiet town where nothing interesting ever happens. That was when Rex moved, the German Shepherd, launched himself forward with explosive power, covering the 20 yards between himself and Walker in seconds that the corrupt chief never saw coming. Rex's training kicked in with lethal precision, disable the primary threat, protect the partner, neutralize the danger. Walker's gun went flying as 90 pounds of muscle and determination slammed into his chest, driving him to the ground with a force that knocked the wind from his lungs. The other 3 men tried to react, but Rex was already moving again, using speed and tactical awareness to prevent them from getting clear shots. Daniel grabbed Marlena's hand and pulled her toward the cabin, using the structure for cover, while Rex systematically dismantled their attackers' coordination with the efficiency of a guided missile. The car. Daniel shouted over the sounds of struggle and shouted commands. We need to get to the car. But even as they ran, Daniel knew their problems were just beginning. If Walker was part of the conspiracy, then the entire law enforcement apparatus of Millstone was compromised. They couldn't call for backup, couldn't trust radio communications, couldn't rely on any of the systems they'd spent their careers believing. Rex appeared beside them as they reached the tree line, his muzzle bloody but his eyes alert and focused. Behind them, Daniel could hear Walker shouting orders to regroup and pursue. But the chief's voice was strained with pain and the kind of fury that comes from having carefully laid plans disrupted by variables that were never supposed to exist. The state police. Marlena gasped as they crashed through the underbrush. We need to get this evidence to someone outside the local network. First, we need to survive long enough to make contact. Daniel replied, helping her navigate the rough terrain, while Rex ranged ahead, scouting for threats and obstacles. They reached Daniel's patrol car just as the first shots rang out behind them. Walker and his men had recovered enough to begin pursuit, and they were no longer concerned with maintaining the pretense of a peaceful resolution. Daniel started the engine as Marlena dove into the passenger seat, and Rex leaped through the open rear window with the fluid grace of someone who had done this maneuver 1,000 times in training. As they pulled away from the access road, Daniel's radio crackled to life with Walker's voice. All units be advised that Officer Hayes has gone rogue. He's armed and dangerous, possibly suffering a psychological breakdown related to the Morrison case. Approach with extreme caution Daniel switched off the radio, knowing that every law enforcement officer in the county would now be looking for them, and most of them would have no idea they were hunting the very people trying to expose the truth. "Where can we go?" Marlena asked, clutching the evidence box as if it were a life preserver. "Somewhere they won't think to look." Daniel replied, his mind racing through options. "Somewhere we can make contact with outside authorities without being detected." Rex whined softly from the back seat, and Daniel glanced in the rearview mirror to see the dog staring back toward the woods they'd just escaped. The German shepherd's expression was one Daniel had never seen before, not fear or pain, but a kind of grim determination that suggested Rex understood they were now fighting not just for justice, but for survival. The conspiracy that had killed Officer Tom Henley and countless children had finally shown its true face, and that face belonged to people they'd trusted with their lives and their community's safety. But they also had something the conspiracy had never faced before: the unwavering loyalty of a partner who would never compromise, never surrender, and never stop fighting for what was right as. Daniel drove through the back roads of Millstone, avoiding main thoroughfares and known checkpoints. He realized that their investigation had become something much larger than a missing person case. They were now the last obstacle between a network of killers and the continuation of decades of carefully hidden atrocities. The question was whether one cop, one elderly woman, and one German shepherd would be enough to finally drag the truth into the lighter, whether the shadows of Millstone would claim 3 more victims in their relentless hunger for silence. The abandoned Grange Hall on the outskirts of Millstone hadn't seen a gathering like this in decades. Built in the 1940s for community meetings and social events, it had fallen into disuse as the town's population declined and people grew more isolated from their neighbors. But tonight, under the harsh glare of borrowed floodlights powered by a generator, it served as a makeshift courtroom where truth would finally confront the lies that had poisoned their community for 37 years. Daniel stood behind a folding table with Marlena Henley, both of them flanked by state police investigators who had responded to their desperate call for help. The evidence from Tom Henley's cache was spread across the table photographs, documents, and recorded testimony that painted a picture of systematic abuse and murder that had operated under the protection of local authority for decades. Rex lay beside Daniel's chair, calm but watchful, his amber eyes scanning the crowd of townspeople who had gathered in response to word spreading through social media and emergency phone calls. The German shepherd's presence was a reminder that sometimes justice comes through the most unexpected channels and that truth has a way of surfacing when the right catalyst appears. The crowd was a mixture of grief and rage, hope and fear. Families of missing children sat in the front rows clutching photographs and missing person reports that had been dismissed or ignored for decades. Behind them, longtime residents wrestled with the realization that their quiet town had harbored secrets that rivaled the worst horrors they'd ever imagined. Chief Walker sat in custody near the back of the hall, flanked by state troopers and wearing handcuffs that seemed to have aged him 10 years in the past 12 hours. His arrest had sent shockwaves through the department, but it was only the beginning of what State Police Captain Sarah Rodriguez described as the largest criminal conspiracy investigation in the state's history. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Rodriguez said, her voice carrying clearly through the portable sound system that had been hastily assembled. "We're here tonight because Officer Daniel Hayes and his K-9 partner Rex uncovered evidence of crimes that have been hidden from you for nearly 4 decades. What you're about to hear will be difficult to process, but you have a right to know the truth about what happened in your community." Marlena Henley stood slowly, her hands shaking as she approached the microphone. The metal evidence box sat open beside her, its contents representing her brother's sacrifice and the key to finally unlocking decades of carefully guarded secrets. "My brother Tom was a good police officer." She began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "He believed in justice, in protecting the innocent. in serving his community with honor. When he discovered that children were disappearing not because of random crimes or family problems, but because of an organized network that included people in positions of trust and authority, he made a choice that cost him his life. She held up one of the surveillance photographs, a clear image of Sarah Morrison with a man whose face was well known to everyone in the hall. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they recognized Harold Brennan, who had served as Millstone's mayor for 15 years and was currently running for county commissioner. Tom documented everything. Marlena continued financial transactions meeting, locations, communications between network members, and most importantly, evidence of what happened to the children who were taken. The suitcase that Officer Hayes and Rex found was just the beginning. My brother created multiple evidence caches throughout town, each one designed to lead investigators deeper into the conspiracy. Rex stood up and moved to Marlena's side, offering silent support as she faced the crowd of her neighbors and friends. The dog's presence seemed to give her additional strength, reminding everyone present that justice sometimes requires courage from unexpected sources. "How many?" shouted a voice from the crowd. Margaret Porter, whose son David had vanished in 1989. "How many children did they take?" Captain Rodriguez consulted her notes, her expression grim. "Based on the evidence we've recovered so far, we've identified at least 18 missing children, cases spanning from 1975 to 1998, that show clear signs of conspiracy involvement. But we believe the actual number may be higher. Some disappearances may have been explained away as runaways or accidents when they were actually part of the network's activities." The number hit the crowd like a physical blow. 18 children, nearly 2 generations of Millstone's youth, sacrificed to protect the interests of people who had presented themselves as community leaders and protectors. Robert Chen stood up slowly, holding a photograph of his daughter. "Amy, you said 1975 to 1998. Amy disappeared in 1983. Are you telling me that for 15 years after my daughter was murdered, this network continued operating? That other families lost children while the people responsible were still free?" Mr. Chen, Captain Rodriguez replied gently, "The evidence suggests that the network was shut down in 1998, not because of law enforcement action, but because several key members died of natural causes and the remaining participants were concerned about increased scrutiny from state and federal authorities." The crime stopped, but the cover-up continued. Daniel felt the weight of collective grief and rage pressing down on the hall like a physical force. These families had spent decades believing their children had simply vanished into the unknown, never imagining that their losses were part of a calculated conspiracy that included people they'd trusted and respected. Rex sensed the emotional intensity of the crowd and moved closer to Daniel, offering comfort while remaining alert to potential threats. The dog's calm presence was a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming evil, there remained sources of loyalty and goodness that could not be corrupted. "What happens now?" asked Maria Santos, bouncing her infant son as she struggled to process the revelations. "These people, some of them are still alive, still living in our community. What happens to them? The investigation is ongoing, Captain," Rodriguez replied. "We have state and federal agencies working together to identify all network members, both living and deceased. Those who are still alive will face prosecution to the fullest extent of the law. But I want to be clear, this process will take time, and it will require courage from all of you." An elderly man in the back of the hall stood up, his face flushed with anger. "Courage? Where was our courage when these children were being taken? Where was our courage when Tom Henley was murdered for trying to protect them?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, and Daniel realized they were witnessing something larger than a criminal investigation. They were watching a community confront its collective failure to protect its most vulnerable members. "You want to know where our courage was?" called out another voice. Billy Kramer, Sarah Morrison's childhood friend, now 73 years old, and carrying the weight of secrets that had haunted him for decades. Our courage was beaten out of us by people who made it clear that asking questions was dangerous. Our courage was buried under threats and intimidation, and the knowledge that speaking up would only make things worse. Billy made his way to the front of the hall, his gait unsteady, but his voice growing stronger with each step. I was 10 years old when Sarah disappeared, and I knew something was wrong. I knew the story about her running away didn't make sense. But when I tried to tell adults what I'd seen, they told me I was confused, that I was imagining things, that I should forget about it and move on. Rex watched Billy approach with the same protective instincts he'd shown toward Marlena, recognition that this was another witness whose courage had finally overcome decades of fear and silence. "What did you see, Mr. Kramer?" Captain Rodriguez asked gently. Billy's voice broke as he spoke. "I saw Sarah get into a car with someone she trusted. Someone who told her he was taking her somewhere special. Somewhere safe I tried to follow, but I was just a kid on a bicycle. By the time I got help, they said Sarah had never been seen getting into any car, that I must have been confused about what I saw." The hall was completely silent as Billy continued. "For 63 years, I've carried the guilt of not being able to save my best friend. I've wondered if I could have done something different, said something more convincing, found a way to make the adults listen. Tonight, I finally understand that the adults weren't ignoring me. They were silencing me. And the person who took Sarah wasn't a stranger she should have been afraid of. It was someone the whole town trusted. Daniel felt Rex press against his leg, the dog's presence a reminder that justice sometimes requires a lifetime of patience before the right moment arrives to speak truth to power. The German Shepherd's unwavering loyalty had become the catalyst for revelations that were reshaping everything the people of Millstone thought they knew about their community and themselves. As the evening continued, more witnesses came forward. People who had seen things they'd been told to forget, who had asked questions they'd been warned not to ask, who had carried pieces of the truth in isolation. For decades. The evidence box that had started it all sat open on the table, its contents finally serving the purpose Tom Henley had intended when he sacrificed his life to ensure the truth would eventually surface. The ghosts of Millstone were finally being confronted, and the living were learning that healing begins with the courage to face the darkest chapters of their shared history. The break in the case came at 3:47 a.m., 3 days after the town hall meeting that had split Millstone down the middle between those demanding justice and those still clinging to the comfortable lies that had protected their community's reputation. For decades, Daniel was sleeping fitfully in a safe house provided by the state police when Rex began exhibiting the behavior that had started everything. The rigid attention, the focused intensity, the unmistakable signal that the German Shepherd had detected something significant. But this time, Rex wasn't alerting to a static piece of evidence. The dog was tracking a living scent following an invisible trail that led from their secure location toward the industrial district on the far side of town. Daniel had learned to trust Rex's instincts absolutely. And when the dog began pacing by the door with urgent whimpers, Daniel knew they were being presented with an opportunity that might not come again. "Captain Rodriguez," Daniel said into his encrypted radio, "Rex is tracking something. Request permission to follow his lead." The response was immediate. "Negative haze. Too dangerous. We don't know who else might be compromised in the local network, but Rex was already moving his nose to the ground and his powerful frame pulling toward the door with the kind of determination that had led them to Tom Henley's evidence cache. Daniel made a decision that went against orders, but followed the deeper wisdom of their partnership, grabbed his weapon and tactical gear, and followed his canine partner into the pre-dawn darkness. The trail led through back alleys and abandoned lots past shuttered businesses and empty warehouses that had once been the heart of Millstone's modest, industrial base. Rex moved with purpose through the urban landscape, his nose processing layers of scent information that painted an invisible map of human activity and movement patterns. Daniel followed at a distance that gave Rex room to work, while maintaining visual contact and tactical awareness. They were heading toward the old quarry, the same location where Tom Henley had gone to meet his anonymous contact 37 years ago, the place where a good cop had walked into a trap that had cost him his life. Daniel felt the hair on his arms rise as he realized they were following the same path that had led to tragedy decades earlier. Rex stopped at the edge of the quarry, his body language shifting from tracking mode to full alert. The German Shepherd had found what he was looking for, but the discovery was more complex than a simple evidence cache. Someone was down there in the darkness, moving with the careful stealth of a person who believed they were unobserved. Daniel used his night vision scope to survey the quarry floor, scanning the rocky terrain, until he spotted the figure Rex had detected. An elderly man was working by the light of a small flashlight, methodically destroying documents and photographs that he was feeding to a small fire. Even from a distance, Daniel could see that the materials being burned were similar to the evidence they'd recovered from Tom Henley's caches. The man looked up suddenly as if sensing he was being watched, and Daniel got a clear view of his face through the scope. Walter Grimsby, 78 years old, retired banker, pillar of the community, and according to the evidence they'd uncovered, the financial coordinator for the network that had operated in Millstone for over 2 decades. Rex tensed beside Daniel, waiting for the command that would send him down into the quarry to apprehend the suspect. But Daniel hesitated, knowing that a single elderly man destroying evidence wasn't the only loose end left. If Grimsby had returned to the quarry after all these years, it meant he believed the network still had influence or members willing to fight for their survival. Daniel had to assume that others were nearby, possibly armed, possibly desperate enough to kill again. Rex's low growl snapped Daniel's focus back to the immediate threat. The German Shepherd's gaze was fixed on a shadow moving along the ridge opposite them. Through his night vision scope, Daniel spotted a second figure much younger, carrying a rifle, keeping watch over Grimsby. This wasn't just an old man destroying documents. This was a coordinated operation to erase the last trace of the conspiracy Tom Henley died trying to expose. Daniel took a slow breath. "We've only got one shot at this," he whispered to Rex. The dog responded with a barely audible whine, muscles coiled and ready to move. Daniel signaled silently for Rex to flank left while he moved down the rocky slope, using every bit of cover the jagged quarry, provided the second guard hadn't spotted them yet. But as Daniel closed in, Grimsby's flashlight beam swept upward, catching the faint glint of Daniel's badge. The old man froze for a fraction of a second, and then all hell broke loose. The guard shouted a warning and opened fire bullets, sparking off rock. Rex exploded from the shadows like a missile, slamming into the shooter's legs before he could aim again. The rifle clattered to the ground as Rex's jaws clamped onto the man's arm, dragging him down with a snarl that echoed off the quarry walls. Daniel advanced, weapon trained on Grimsby, who had backed toward the fire pit, clutching a half-burned folder. "Drop it!" Daniel shouted. "It's over!" Grimsby's hands trembled, but his voice was chillingly calm. "You don't understand, Officer Hayes. You think this ends with me? With Walker? Tom Henley thought that too, and they buried him and every child who stood in their way. Burn this, and maybe your town survives." "No," Daniel said. Stepping closer, Tom believed the truth would surface when someone was brave enough to drag it into the light. That time is now. Grimsby's resolve wavered as Rex released the subdued guard and moved to Daniel's side, lips curled, teeth bared. With a final defeated sigh, Grimsby dropped the folder and sank to his knees. "Then finish it," he muttered. God help us all. By sunrise, state police helicopters thundered over the quarry. Grimsby, the armed guard, and the last unburned caches of evidence were secured under heavy protection. Forensics teams confirmed that the documents detailed every financial transaction, every payoff, every threat the network had used to keep Millstone silent. Names long whispered about now faced indictments that would ripple through county and state politics for years, as the final load of evidence was lifted into a waiting van. Daniel knelt beside Rex, running a hand through the dog's thick fur. "You did it, boy," Daniel said softly, emotion catching in his throat. "You finished what Tom Henley started." The town gathered later that week for a memorial where Tom Henley's name was finally cleared. Families of the missing placed photographs beside the suitcase that had started it all now displayed in a glass case at the courthouse. Billy Kramer stood shoulder to shoulder with Marlena Henley, both weeping openly as Daniel and Rex were honored for their courage. In the quiet that followed, Daniel stood alone at Miller's Pond with Rex sitting beside him, watching mist curl off the water. "We can finally rest," Daniel whispered, though he knew deep down. Their partnership would always be ready to face the next shadow, the next hidden truth, because some towns never truly stop needing heroes. Rex nudged Daniel's hand with his muzzle and let out a soft, contented bark. The sound carried across the pond like a promise. The dark chapter of Millstone was finally closed, and justice, though long delayed, had finally arrived.